We begin by meeting Drew and Hannah, who are heading to the family's old residence, the ancestral mansion where Drew's father, Charles Abernathy, a billionaire who had just turned 75, had organized a gathering to celebrate his birthday and had invited all the children to attend. There are the twins Madeline and John, who hold executive positions at two distinct billion-dollar corporations, and the fourth daughter, Kami, known for her work as a social media influencer, and the reunion takes place after 2 long years of estrangement, which partly explains the scowling faces and the air of resentment perceived among them, since old wounds have not been healed. No one fully understands why Charles called them so abruptly. The head of security, Miles, leads them inside, but the mansion strangely seems deserted, without the expected staff, as if the host wanted that night only for himself and his children. Charles had justified that he wanted to spend the night with family, and upon receiving the guests, he shows surprise at seeing Hannah, because the invitation clearly stated that only the children were authorized to be present. Hannah, meanwhile, admits that she entered without an invitation, driven by anxiety to greet him on his 75th birthday, and explains that she and Drew had prepared a surprise gift they hoped to reveal that night. Then Charles drops a declaration that sounds like a bomb. He states that he will die that night, before midnight, because someone is trying to destroy him. He reveals that this is why he locked the house and dismissed the security, because he needed to protect it from any external manipulation. He confesses, in a weary voice, that throughout his life he accumulated wealth beyond measure, and with that, collected many enemies, acknowledging past mistakes and justifying that the nature of the world led him to take shortcuts that now haunt him. He begs his children to protect him that night so he can survive, and to heighten the tension. He reads a will he had drafted. If he survives until dawn, the fortune will be divided equally among the children. If he dies before the turn of the hour, all the estate will be donated to the Abernathy Foundation, which emerges as a surprise and shock to everyone who had never prepared for such a possibility. The scene generates varied reactions. Some suspect that Charles has gone mad, or that it is all a sick test to evaluate the offspring's character, while others express fear. Charles, for his part, has already mustered drastic measures. Bulletproof glass windows were installed so that no one inside could easily leave. The doors were sealed, and he requested that Hannah leave the house, claiming that the protection mission was exclusive to the children. She ignores that request, stating that if her father is telling the truth, she needs to help. John and Madeline conclude that the patriarch has lost his mind. To them, this is just another desperate effort to force the family to reunite. Hannah, however, ponders that if there is even a small chance of real danger, even if only 1%, it is worth trying to prevent a possible attack, and this idea convinces Drew and Kami, who decide to scour the property in search of evidence of anything suspicious, while John and Madeline withdraw to the bedroom. Kami begins her search in the cellar, where old wines are kept. Her interest seems more geared toward tasting than a serious investigation, but while rummaging among the bottles, she hears a growl coming from some dark spot and has the immediate sense that something or someone is watching her in the gloom. Seized by panic, she makes a noise and runs to the door, only to discover that it is locked. A prank by John, who had closed the door to provoke a scare. However, on the cellar wall, the shadow of a figure projects clearly, which reinforces the hypothesis that Charles may indeed be right about a threatening presence. Drew and Hannah go after Charles for explanations. They ask the patriarch directly what is happening, and he repeats that if he told them all the details, they would not believe him and would soon call him crazy. In the game room, John plays pool, and an apparently supernatural occurrence frightens him. His glass falls on its own, and when he checks the table, he notices that the balls are strangely arranged correctly and orderly, a fact that perturbs him. Meanwhile, Kami, still immersed in influencer mode, records reels amid that unusual lockdown, and during a filming she notices a shadow behind her. Startled, she approaches to check, and upon looking, finds nothing there. Believing it to be nothing, she returns to filming until someone attacks her from behind. She falls into the pool holding her phone, and then her body surfaces lifeless, wounded, and floating with blood all around. The discovery of the death shocks everyone. John feels guilty, since as the older brother, he should have been watching Kami, but he was distracted with hostile takeover plans. Medellin had planted the idea of seizing the family empire by alleging the father's mental illness, citing examples of other businessmen whose relatives had resorted to similar artifices. And Medellin, for her part, tries to minimize, saying it could be an accident, although she soon begins to point to Hannah as a suspect, because she is new to the family and might have motives to eliminate Kami for the inheritance. She implicitly suggests that perhaps Hannah and Drew orchestrated the death to obtain the estate. The accusation enrages Drew, who fires back with a similar charge against the twins, while Hannah tries to calm the atmosphere and poses a question that alters the course of the suspicions. What if the killer is already inside the house? They inform Charles of the tragedy, and he receives the news pained, but refuses to open the doors. He states that the situation will deteriorate from that moment on, because midnight is approaching, and reveals something even more disturbing. The being that wants to kill him is not human, but a malevolent spirit. He admits that years ago he made a pact that cost someone's life, and now that thing is hunting him. In that climate, Charles changes the will. He transfers the $2 billion share that would belong to Kami to Hannah for having chosen to remain in the house, and thus the children face the need to save their father from a supernatural ghost, an idea that sounds completely insane to the twins. John, fearing what that implies and believing it is all theater created by the siblings to steal the money, grabs a gun, locks Charles in the library, and retreats to his room. Drew and Hannah insist on beginning to search for the supposed ghost, an action that further arouses John's distrust, convinced it is a ploy to secure the fortune. A suspicion strengthened by the fact that Hannah received $2 billion, an amount the twins view with rancor, especially because they never sympathized with Hannah, even holding nearly racist attitudes and thoughts toward her, unable to accept that Charles allowed Drew's marriage to someone outside their class. While Drew and Hannah search the house, they discover that Kami's body has disappeared, showing that someone dragged it away, which causes panic in Hannah and makes her want to flee the mansion like a sprinter. But all exits are locked. Desperate, and saying to hell with the money, she tries to break the windows without success, until Drew restrains her because he knows an alternative exit through the antiques room. Medellin, in her room, reports having seen a ghostly presence in the form of Kami's image. John arrives in the room, but sees that it is only a portrait of the young woman. Medellin tells John about a boy from college she liked, and how Charles had rejected the suitor due to his status, noting that he had not objected to Hannah in Drew's case. And this further fuels the twins' belief that they are being replaced by intruders, even though they worked hard and dedicated their lives to Charles, a sentiment that culminates in the decision to finish off Drew and Hannah once and for all. In the antiques room, Charles had piled numerous old objects such as statues, portraits, historical artifacts that Drew's mother believed were cursed, and that in her time she protested against their presence in the house for fearing they would one day bring misfortune. To avoid public transport of the items, Charles had wished to install a private elevator that carried the pieces directly to that room. While Hannah tries to leave, she becomes stuck in some mechanism and begins to suffer compression from an invisible force and is nearly crushed. Drew grabs her in time, but it is clear that something is very wrong. Suddenly, all the statues in the room turn toward them and stare. Then the lights go out, objects fall, and in the midst of the chaos they catch a glimpse of the ghost, whose appearance is terrible. Hearing a knock on the father's door, they run there expecting to find Charles and, upon entering, see the safe open. Assuming Charles may have rushed there, they enter the safe, and John, in an extreme gesture, locks the lid from outside, planning to kill the two there, because the safe was equipped with an exhaust that would cause the oxygen to run out. When the twins relax, believing they have neutralized the threat, they hear the father knock and notice a shadowy figure following them. Medellin goes ahead to check and sees only footprints. Suddenly something grabs her by the neck and lifts her into the air, dragging her, and John watches the scene in horror. Later, we see her in her room, in front of Kami's portrait from which blood drips down her face, and from there, a malevolent humanoid entity emerges and attacks Medellin. The creature stays over the woman until John reaches the room. John, with his gun, rushes to try to stop it, and in fear fires, accidentally hitting Medellin, who dies on the spot. John tries to rescue her, but fails, and hears the knocking again while tormented by a voice. He watches, petrified, as Medellin's body disappears mysteriously, something that terrifies him and makes him immediately understand the gravity of what is happening, leading him to run to the safe and free Drew and Hannah, whose oxygen was nearly exhausted. They emerge thanking him without knowing it was John who had trapped them there. John then asks them to try to deal with Charles while he leaves to confront the entity with a bullet in the gun, a desperate and almost suicidal act. The haunting, however, proves astute and begins to pursue Drew and Hannah, who flee like crazy and lock themselves in a room where they find a hidden chamber. In that hidden chamber, they discover occult material, ritual books and summoning spells, and from the gathered evidence, Hannah finally understands that Charles made a pact with a supernatural entity. Meanwhile, the entity continues to pursue John, forcing him to jump from the top of the mansion. Afterward, it assumes the form of Medellin to suck what little life remains in him, and the clock advances toward midnight, the moment when the creature reaches the height of its power. It chases the two to Charles's room, and there he explains, in a fatigued voice, the reason for everything. Charles's ancestors were super rich, but by his father's time they had lost all their wealth in various frauds. To emerge from squalid poverty, he had made a deal with a demon called Mammon, the demon of greed, delivering his soul on his 75th birthday in exchange for riches. A pact that made Charles immensely wealthy, but which had now come due. Initially satisfied, the death of his wife awakened in him a hunger for legacy, an ambition for the Abernathy name to remain forever. Thus, he renegotiated the deal, offering not only his own life but his lineage, his descendants, in exchange for ensuring his symbolic permanence in history. That was why he summoned his children that night. They were to save him by sacrificing themselves, and so the entity was eliminating them to demand the debt. Faced with this revelation, Drew, stunned to feel betrayed by the father he believed he knew, is met with a point-blank shot. Charles draws the gun without hesitation and kills Drew, and Hannah falls into despair, crying in shock because she never imagined this could happen. Charles, in his defense, claims he repeatedly asked everyone to leave the house, and now, because they are witnesses, the two were targets. He points the gun at Hannah and fires, but she escapes alive and runs away. She manages to hide in the dark, and by luck finds John's gun, which contained only one bullet. When Charles advances, Hannah shoots him, and it is already past midnight when she reveals to Charles that he will not be the last Abernathy. She is pregnant with Drew's child, so the lineage remains intact. Drew had wanted to announce the baby as a birthday present to his father, but events took a tragically different turn. Since Charles did not fulfill his part of the deal by midnight, the demon approaches him and takes his life. The next morning, Hannah leaves that calamity overcome with sadness, because she never wanted the money. She loved Drew and only wished to share a family, even though those relatives had shown themselves to be greedy and criminal in her eyes.